The wind howled across the Montana prairie, a mournful wail that carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows over the rugged expanse of the Blackfeet Reservation, where golden grass swayed in waves and jagged bluffs loomed like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, the horizon bruised with purple clouds. Dr. Lila Blackfoot, a wildlife biologist with deep roots in the Blackfeet Nation, paused on the crest of a low hill, her boots crunching against the dry earth. Her dark braids swung as she adjusted her binoculars, scanning the vastness for signs of the buffalo herd she'd been tracking for weeks. Lila was no stranger to this land. Born and raised on the reservation, she'd spent her childhood listening to her grandfather's stories of Tatanka, the buffalo, a sacred symbol of strength and resilience. Her Ph.D. in wildlife ecology from Montana State had only deepened her reverence for the animals her people had lived alongside for centuries. Now, at 38, she was a respected figure in conservation circles, known for her work protecting the reservation's buffalo herd, a keystone species that held the prairie ecosystem together. But today, something felt off. The herd had been restless, their usual grazing patterns disrupted, and now, as the wind stung her cheeks, Lila sensed a disturbance in the air. She lowered her binoculars, her sharp eyes catching a solitary figure in the distance. A massive buffalo bull stood alone in a shallow draw, its hulking form unmistakable even from half a mile away. At nearly 2,000 pounds and 6 feet at the shoulder, it was a mountain of muscle and fur, its chestnut-brown coat matted with dust and streaked with darker patches. Its curved horns glinted faintly in the fading light, and its massive head was lowered, as if guarding something. Lila's pulse quickened. Buffalo rarely stood alone, especially a bull this size. Something was wrong. "Lila, you see that?" called a voice behind her. Tommy Two Rivers, a local rancher and her longtime friend, jogged up the hill, his weathered hat tilted against the wind. Tommy had grown up with Lila, and though he was more pragmatic than spiritual, he shared her respect for the buffalo. He joined her today to check on a fence line damaged by recent storms, but now his eyes were fixed on the solitary bull. "Yeah," Lila replied, her voice tight. "He's not moving. Doesn't look right." She slung her pack over her shoulder, grabbing her medical kit. "Let's get closer." The two descended the hill, their footsteps muffled by the grass. As they approached, the buffalo's details came into focus. Its flanks heaved with labored breaths, and a dark, wet stain glistened on its left shoulder. Blood, Lila realized, her stomach twisting. The bull's eyes, deep and liquid, locked onto them, but it didn't flee. That alone was alarming. Buffalo were wary creatures, quick to charge or bolt when humans drew near. Yet this one stood its ground, its massive hooves rooted to the earth, its head lowered protectively over a patch of trampled grass. "Easy, big fella," Lila murmured, slowing her pace. The buffalo snorted, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. Its ears twitched, but it didn't move. Lila's gaze darted to the ground beneath it. Something lay there, partially hidden by the bull's bulk, a shape that didn't belong. Her heart skipped. Was it a calf? A trap? Something worse? Tommy stopped beside her, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back, though he made no move to raise it. "He's hurt bad, Lila. Look at that gash. Could be wolves, maybe a poacher's shot that grazed him." Lila nodded, her mind racing. The wound was deep, a jagged tear that oozed blood, matting the buffalo's thick woolly coat. Yet the bull's stance was resolute, its muscles taut with purpose. She crouched, trying to see what it was guarding. A faint, rasping sound reached her ears, not the wind, but something alive, something struggling. Her breath caught. "Tommy, there's something under him. Something's alive." The rancher's brow furrowed. "A calf? One of the herd?" "I don't think so." Lila edged closer, her movements slow and deliberate. The buffalo's eyes followed her, sharp and unyielding, but there was something else in its gaze, a spark of intelligence, almost a plea. She'd seen buffalo charge, stampede, and graze, but never had she seen one look at her like this, as if it knew she could help. The wind gusted, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the musky scent of the buffalo's coat. Lila's heart pounded as she inched forward, her boots sinking into the soft earth. The buffalo shifted, its massive head swinging toward her, and for a moment, she froze, bracing for a charge. But instead, it let out a low, guttural moan, its head dipping as if to point at the ground. Lila followed its gaze and gasped. There, curled in the trampled grass, was a tiger, a young, emaciated creature, its orange and black stripes dulled by dirt and blood. Its flank was torn, claw marks raking its side, and its breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint whimper. A tiger in Montana was impossible, absurd, a creature of jungles and distant lands, not the American West. Yet here it was, trembling beneath the buffalo's protective bulk. "Tommy, you seeing this?" Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Tommy's jaw dropped, his hand falling from his rifle. "A tiger? Out here? That's crazy. How the hell did it get here?" Lila's mind spun. Escaped from a private collector? A circus? A smuggler's crate? None of it made sense, but the tiger's condition was dire, and the buffalo's behavior was even stranger. It hadn't fled from the predator, nor attacked it. Instead, it stood sentinel, its massive body shielding the tiger from the elements, or something worse. As if on cue, a distant howl pierced the air, sharp and chilling. Wolves. A pack, by the sound of it, circling closer. Lila's eyes darted to the horizon, where shadows moved in the gathering dusk. The buffalo snorted again, its hooves pawing the ground, sending up clouds of dust. Its wounds glistened, but its resolve was unshaken. It was protecting the tiger, Lila realized, her chest tightening with awe and urgency. This wasn't just instinct, this was something deeper, something extraordinary. "Tommy, we need to act fast," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "That tiger's hurt bad, and those wolves aren't far off. The buffalo's not gonna let us near it unless we show we're helping." Tommy nodded, his face pale but determined. "What's the plan, Doc?" Lila's eyes flicked between the buffalo and the tiger, her training kicking in. She'd handled injured animals before, but never under such bizarre circumstances. The buffalo's trust was key. If she could earn it, they might save both creatures. But the wolves were closing in, and the storm clouds were rolling closer, their rumble echoing like a warning. "We need a vet, and we need backup," she said, pulling out her radio. "Call the tribal police and get Dr. Martinez out here. Tell her it's urgent, a predator and a buffalo, both injured." Tommy fumbled with his own radio, his voice low as he relayed the message. Lila turned back to the buffalo, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "Hey, big guy," she said softly, her voice carrying the cadence of her grandfather's stories. "I see you. I know you're protecting something important. Let me help." The buffalo's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. Its breathing slowed, its massive head tilting slightly, as if weighing her words. Then, with a low bellow that shook the air, it stepped to the side, revealing the tiger fully. The creature's eyes fluttered open, a weak glint of defiance in their amber depths. Lila's heart ached at the sight. Two magnificent animals, both wounded, one shielding the other against all odds. Another howl split the air, closer now. The buffalo's ears flicked, its body tensing. Lila's gaze darted to the grass beneath the tiger, where something glinted faintly, a piece of metal, half buried in the dirt. A tag? A collar? A clue to the tiger's origins? There was no time to investigate. The wolves were coming, and the buffalo's strength was fading. Lila took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She didn't know how a tiger had ended up here, or why this buffalo had chosen to protect it, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let either of them die. Not today. The Montana prairie was growing darker, the storm clouds swallowing the last slivers of sunlight. The wind whipped harder now, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and the distant, eerie howls of wolves. Lila Blackfoot crouched near the massive buffalo bull, her eyes darting between its blood-streaked flank and the injured tiger curled beneath it. The buffalo's deep, labored breaths filled the air, a rhythmic rumble that seemed to anchor the chaos around them. Its chestnut-brown coat, matted with dirt and blood, glistened under the flickering light of an approaching storm. The tiger, its orange and black stripes marred by claw marks, whimpered faintly, its amber eyes half open but alert. Lila's heart pounded. This was no ordinary situation, and time was running out. Tommy Two Rivers stood a few paces back, his radio crackling as he relayed their location to the tribal police and Dr. Elena Martinez, the reservation's best wildlife veterinarian. "They're on their way," he said, his voice tight. "But those wolves sound close, Lila. Too close." "I know," she replied, her gaze fixed on the buffalo. Its massive head swung toward her, its dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was no aggression in its stare, only a strange, almost pleading resolve. It snorted softly, its hooves shifting, as if urging her to act. Lila's mind raced. A buffalo protecting a tiger? It defied everything she knew about animal behavior. Buffalo were prey animals, wary of predators, yet this bull stood guard over a wounded carnivore, risking its own life. "Why? We need to get closer," Lila said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I need to see how bad the tiger's hurt and figure out what's going on here." Tommy hesitated, his hand hovering near his rifle. "That buffalo's not gonna let us near without a fight. Look at him, he's bleeding out, but he's not budging." "He's not aggressive," Lila countered, her years of studying buffalo kicking in. "He's protecting the tiger. Look at how he's standing, head low, body angled to shield it. He's not threatened by us. He's asking for help." Tommy's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "You're the expert, document. Just tell me what to do." Lila took a cautious step forward, her boots crunching on the dry grass. The buffalo's ears flicked, but it didn't move. Its wound, a deep gash across its shoulder, oozed blood, staining the earth beneath it. She could see the muscle trembling beneath its thick coat, a sign of exhaustion, yet its stance was unwavering. The tiger's rasping breaths grew fainter, and Lila's chest tightened. If they didn't act soon, both animals could die. "Easy, big guy," she murmured, her voice soft and rhythmic, echoing the cadence her grandfather used when calming spooked horses. "I'm here to help. Let me see your friend." The buffalo let out a low, guttural moan, its head dipping slightly as if acknowledging her words. Lila's breath caught. She'd seen buffalo communicate with their herd, but this felt different, deliberate, almost human. She edged closer, her eyes scanning the tiger. The claw marks on its flank were deep, likely from a wolf pack, and its ribs were starkly visible beneath its matted fur. It was young, maybe 2 years old, and dangerously malnourished. But how had it ended up here, in the heart of the Blackfeet Reservation? Lila's gaze dropped to the glint of metal she'd spotted earlier, half buried in the dirt near the tiger's paw. She crouched lower, careful not to startle the buffalo. It was a tag, small and rusted, attached to a frayed leather strap that looked like part of a collar. She couldn't read it from this distance, but its presence confirmed her suspicions. The tiger wasn't wild. It had come from somewhere, someone. "Tommy, that tag," she said, pointing. "It's a collar. This tiger's not supposed to be here." "Smugglers?" Tommy asked, his voice low. "Or some rich guy's pet that got loose?" "Maybe," Lila said, her mind spinning. Exotic animal trafficking wasn't unheard of in Montana, though it was rare. The reservation's remote location made it a tempting route for smugglers avoiding major highways. But that didn't explain the buffalo's behavior. Why protect a predator that didn't belong here? Another howl split the air, closer now, followed by a chorus of yips. The buffalo snorted, its massive head swinging toward the sound. Its hooves pawed the ground, sending up clouds of dust, and its tail flicked with agitation. Lila's pulse quickened. The wolves were circling, drawn by the scent of blood. She glanced at the tiger, its eyes fluttering as it struggled to stay conscious. The buffalo's protective stance was all that stood between it and the pack. "Lila, we gotta move," Tommy urged, his eyes scanning the darkening horizon. "Those wolves aren't gonna wait for backup." "I know," she said, her mind racing through options. She needed to stabilize the tiger and get the buffalo to safety, but the bull's trust was fragile. One wrong move could trigger a charge, or worse, it might collapse from blood loss. She reached into her pack, pulling out a tranquilizer dart, but hesitated. Drugging the buffalo was a last resort. It was already weakened, and a miscalculated dose could kill it. Instead, she focused on the tiger. "Tommy, get the medical kit ready. We need to stop the bleeding on that tiger before the wolves get here. I'll keep the buffalo calm." Tommy nodded, moving to her pack and pulling out gauze and antiseptic. Lila took another step toward the buffalo, her hands raised, palms open. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she said softly. "I just need to help your friend." "Okay." The buffalo's eyes followed her, unblinking. Then, to her astonishment, it took a small step back, its massive body shifting just enough to give her access to the tiger. Lila's breath caught. This wasn't just instinct, this was trust, a deliberate choice. She knelt beside the tiger, her hands moving quickly to assess its wounds. The claw marks were deep, but not fatal if treated soon. Blood matted its fur, and its breathing was shallow, but it was still fighting. "Good boy," she whispered to the buffalo, her voice trembling with awe. "You're doing good." The buffalo let out a soft, rumbling vocalization, almost like a hum, its head lowering as if to check on the tiger. Lila's heart swelled. She'd read studies on animal cognition, but this was beyond anything she'd seen. The buffalo wasn't just protecting the tiger, it was guarding it with purpose, as if it understood the stakes. "Lila, heads up," Tommy called, his voice sharp. She glanced up to see 3 wolves cresting a nearby rise, their eyes glinting in the dusk. Their hackles were raised, their teeth bared. The buffalo bellowed, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the ground, and stomped its hooves, kicking up dirt. The wolves hesitated, but didn't retreat. "Tommy, keep them back," Lila shouted, her hands working quickly to apply pressure to the tiger's wounds. "Use the flare gun if you have to." Tommy fumbled with the flare gun from her pack, firing a bright red streak into the sky. The wolves flinched at the sudden light, but their growls grew louder. Lila's fingers trembled as she packed gauze into the tiger's deepest wound, her eyes darting to the buffalo. It stood firm, its massive bulk a living shield, but its breathing was growing more ragged, its wound bleeding freely. The radio crackled, and a voice broke through. "Dr. Blackfoot, this is Officer Spotted Elk. We're 10 minutes out with Dr. Martinez. Hang tight." "10 minutes might be too late," Lila muttered, her hands slick with blood. She looked at the tiger's tag again, now close enough to make out faint lettering. "Property of." The rest was too worn to read, but it was enough to confirm her fears. This tiger had been someone's possession, likely abandoned or escaped. But why had the buffalo chosen to protect it? And how had it survived a wolf attack only to end up here? The buffalo's head swung toward her again, its eyes meeting hers. For a moment, Lila felt a connection that transcended species, a shared determination to save this life. She pressed harder on the tiger's wound, her voice steady as she spoke to the buffalo. "We're gonna get you both out of this. I promise." A new sound reached her ears, a faint, mechanical hum, distant but growing louder. A vehicle? Poachers returning? Or help arriving just in time? The wolves howled again, closer now, and the buffalo's bellow answered, fierce and defiant. Lila's heart raced as she realized the truth. This wasn't just about saving the tiger. The buffalo's actions were a mystery, a story of compassion and intelligence that demanded answers. And she was determined to find them. The Montana prairie pulsed with tension, the air thick with the electric tang of an approaching storm. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the wind-swept draw where Dr. Lila Blackfoot knelt beside the wounded tiger, her hands slick with blood as she pressed gauze into its claw-torn flank. The massive buffalo bull loomed over her, its 2,000-pound frame a fortress of fur and muscle, its chestnut coat streaked with crimson from a gash on its shoulder. Its deep, resonant bellows shook the earth, a warning to the wolves circling closer, their eyes glinting like embers in the dusk. The buffalo's hooves pawed the ground, kicking up clouds of dust, its curved horns catching the faint light as it stood sentinel over the tiger. Lila's heart pounded, her breath visible in the cooling air. The tiger's shallow gasps were fading, its amber eyes fluttering with fading strength. The buffalo's own breathing was labored, each exhale a heavy huff that stirred the grass. Yet it held its ground, its dark eyes flicking between Lila and the wolves, as if trusting her to act while it guarded them both. The flare Tommy Two Rivers had fired hung in the sky, its red glow fading, doing little to deter the pack. Their growls grew bolder, their shadows weaving through the sagebrush. "Tommy, how long till backup?" Lila called, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Her fingers worked quickly, securing a bandage around the tiger's deepest wound, but blood still seeped through. The animal was young, barely more than a cub, and its emaciated frame told a story of neglect. The collar tag she'd glimpsed, property of, hinted at a human hand in its plight, but there was no time to unravel that now. 5 minutes, maybe less," Tommy shouted back, his rifle raised as he scanned the horizon. "Tribal police and Martinez are close. I hear their truck." The faint hum of an engine cut through the wind, a lifeline in the chaos. But 5 minutes was an eternity with wolves closing in and 2 injured animals on the brink. Lila glanced at the buffalo, its massive head lowered, its eyes locked on hers. There was a spark in them, intelligence, resolve, something almost human. It hadn't charged her, hadn't fled, even as its strength waned. Instead, it had stepped aside to let her work, as if it knew she was their only chance. "We're running out of time," Lila muttered, her mind racing. The tiger needed immediate care, but moving it risked provoking the buffalo or drawing the wolves closer. She needed the buffalo's trust, and she needed it now. She wiped her bloody hands on her jeans and stood slowly, facing the bull. Its ears flicked, its tail swishing, but it didn't move. The wind carried the scent of its musky coat, mingled with the iron tang of blood and the sharp bite of sage. "Hey, big guy," she said softly, her voice carrying the cadence of her Blackfeet heritage, a tone her grandfather used to calm restless animals. "I know you're protecting this tiger. You're doing good. But I need to move him, get him safe. Can you help me?" The buffalo snorted, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her boots. Its massive head tilted, as if weighing her words. Then, to her astonishment, it took a deliberate step back, its hooves crunching on the gravelly earth, giving her more space to work. Lila's breath caught. This wasn't just instinct, this was cooperation, a choice. She'd read studies on animal cognition, but nothing prepared her for this. "Tommy, get the stretcher from the pack," she called, not taking her eyes off the buffalo. "We're gonna lift the tiger out." Tommy scrambled to the pack, pulling out a collapsible stretcher designed for large animals. The wolves' howls grew sharper, their forms now visible on the rise, 4 of them prowling closer, their teeth bared. The buffalo bellowed again, a sound so deep it seemed to ripple through the air, and stomped its hooves, its massive shoulders flexing. The wolves hesitated, but their hunger was palpable, drawn by the scent of blood. Lila knelt again, her hands gentle as she slid her arms under the tiger's limp body. It whimpered, its head lolling, but its eyes met hers, a faint spark of defiance still burning. "Hang on, little one," she whispered. The buffalo shifted, its head lowering to nudge the tiger gently, a soft, almost tender gesture that made Lila's chest ache. This bull, wounded and exhausted, was risking everything for a creature it should fear. "Ready," Tommy said, positioning the stretcher beside her. His voice was tight, his eyes darting to the wolves. "Lila, we gotta move fast." "On 3, she said, her muscles tensing. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the tiger, its weight surprisingly light for its size, and slid it onto the stretcher. The buffalo's eyes followed every move, its body tense but still. Lila's heart raced as she secured the straps, her fingers trembling. The tiger's breathing was faint, but steady. They had a chance, if they could get it to safety. A snarl erupted behind them, and Lila spun to see a wolf lunging from the shadows, its teeth gleaming. Before she could react, the buffalo charged forward, its massive bulk a blur of power. Its horns swung low, catching the wolf and tossing it back with a yelp. The other wolves scattered, but regrouped quickly, their growls rising. The buffalo stood its ground, blood dripping from its wound, its bellow a defiant roar that echoed across the prairie. "Lila, now!" Tommy shouted, grabbing one end of the stretcher. They lifted it, moving as fast as they could toward the sound of the approaching truck. The buffalo followed, its hooves thundering, its body a shield between them and the wolves. Lila's arms burned, her boots slipping on the uneven ground, but she didn't stop. The tiger's life, and the buffalo's, depended on it. Headlights pierced the dusk, and the tribal police truck skidded to a stop, gravel spraying. Dr. Elena Martinez leapt out, her medical bag in hand, followed by officers spotted elk and another ranger. "What the hell is going on?" Martinez called, her eyes widening at the sight of the buffalo and the tiger. "No time to explain," Lila shouted. "Tiger's critical, wolf attack. Buffalo's protecting it, but it's hurt bad too." Martinez ran to the stretcher, her hands moving with practiced precision as she checked the tiger's vitals. "Pulse is weak, but he's hanging on. We need to get him to the clinic now." The buffalo snorted, its head lowering as it watched Martinez work. Lila stepped toward it, her hand outstretched. "You did good," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've got him now." The bull's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the chaos faded. The wolves' howls, the storm's rumble, the shouts of the team. There was only Lila and the buffalo, a silent understanding passing between them. Then it nudged her hand, its warm breath grazing her skin, a gesture of trust that stole her breath. "Lila, we gotta go," Tommy called, helping Martinez load the stretcher into the truck. The wolves were circling again, emboldened by the buffalo's weakening state. Officers spotted elk fired a warning shot into the air, scattering them temporarily. Lila turned to the buffalo, her heart heavy. "We'll come back for you," she promised. "Hold on." The buffalo bellowed softly, its massive form silhouetted against the lightning-streaked sky. As the truck roared to life, Lila climbed in, her eyes never leaving the bull. It stood alone in the draw, blood pooling beneath it, its head high despite the pain. The tiger was safe, for now, but the buffalo's fate was uncertain, and the mystery of its actions burned in Lila's mind. Why had it risked everything for a predator? And what was the story behind that collar? As the truck sped toward the clinic, Lila clutched the stretcher, her thoughts racing. The buffalo's trust had saved the tiger, but at what cost? And what secrets lay buried in the prairie, waiting to be uncovered? The storm broke over the Blackfeet Reservation just as the truck screeched into the veterinary clinic's gravel lot, rain lashing the windshield in sheets. Dr. Lila Blackfoot gripped the edge of the stretcher, her eyes fixed on the young tiger strapped to it, its orange and black stripes barely visible beneath layers of blood and dirt. The animal's shallow breaths were a faint rhythm against the roar of the storm, but it was alive, thanks to the buffalo bull that had shielded it from wolves. Lila's mind flashed to the bull, still standing in the draw, its massive frame bloodied but unyielding. She'd promised to return for it, and the weight of that vow pressed on her chest. Inside the clinic, a converted barn on the edge of the reservation, Dr. Elena Martinez worked with surgical precision. The tiger lay on a steel table under bright lights, its wounds cleaned and stitched as Martinez barked orders to her assistant. "4 fluids, now. And get me more gauze, this one's still bleeding." The air smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, the hum of a generator underscoring the urgency. Lila stood by, her hands still stained with the tiger's blood, her heart torn between relief and worry for the buffalo left behind. "He's stabilizing," Martinez said, her voice calm but focused as she adjusted the 4-drip. "Young male, maybe 2 years old. Malnourished, dehydrated, and those claw marks are fresh, wolves, no doubt. But he's a fighter." Lila nodded, her eyes drawn to the rusted collar tag dangling from the tiger's neck. She'd managed to retrieve it before they loaded the stretcher, and now she turned it over in her hands. The lettering was faint but legible, property of Crescent Exotic Imports. Her stomach churned. Exotic animal trafficking was a shadowy trade, and Montana's remote highways made it a perfect smuggling route. The tiger had likely escaped or been abandoned, but that didn't explain the buffalo's role, why it had risked its life to protect a predator. "Tommy's with the police, heading back for the buffalo," Martinez said, glancing up from her work. They've got tranquilizers and a trailer. If that bull's still standing, we'll bring him here. Lila's throat tightened. He was bleeding bad, Elena. I don't know how much longer he can hold on. Martinez's eyes softened. You said he trusted you out there. That's not normal buffalo behavior. If he's fighting that hard, he's got a chance. Lila clung to those words as she stepped outside, the rain soaking her jacket. The clinic's floodlights cast a pale glow over the lot, where Officer Spotted Elk's truck idled, ready to head back to the draw. She climbed in, her mind racing. The buffalo's actions were a puzzle. Its protective stance, its gentle nudge, its refusal to flee despite its wounds. She'd spent years studying buffalo, their social bonds, their role as a keystone species in the prairie ecosystem. But this bull, which she'd started calling Thunderheart in her mind, was something else entirely. The drive back was tense, the truck's tires slipping on the muddy trail. Spotted Elk gripped the wheel, his face grim. Wolves are still out there, he said. And the storm's not helping. Hope your buffalo's as tough as you think. He is, Lila said, her voice firm. She pictured Thunderheart's massive shoulders, his curved horns glinting in the lightning, his deep bellow echoing across the prairie. He'd stood like a guardian, defying instinct to protect a creature that didn't belong. She needed to know why. When they reached the draw, the rain had turned the ground to sludge, but Thunderheart was still there, a dark silhouette against the storm. His head was lowered, his flanks heaving, but he stood firm, his hooves rooted to the earth. The wolves were gone, likely driven off by the storm, but the blood pooling beneath him told Lila time was running out. Easy, big guy, she called, stepping from the truck. The rain plastered her braid to her neck, but she ignored it, her eyes locked on Thunderheart. He snorted, his breath a cloud in the cold air, and his eyes met hers. There was pain in them, but also that same spark of intelligence, that same trust. Spotted Elk and Tommy prepared the tranquilizer gun, but Lila raised a hand. Wait. Let me try first. She approached slowly, her boots sinking into the mud. Thunderheart's ears flicked, but he didn't move. She reached out, her hand hovering near his bloodied shoulder. We're here to help you, she said softly. You saved that tiger. Now let us save you. To her amazement, Thunderheart lowered his head, a low moan rumbling from his chest. It was as if he understood. Lila nodded to Tommy, who moved quickly, injecting a low-dose tranquilizer to calm the bull without knocking him out. Thunderheart swayed but stayed upright, allowing them to guide him into the trailer. His coat, once a rich chestnut, was dull with mud and blood, but his presence was still majestic, a symbol of the wilderness itself. Back at the clinic, Martinez and her team worked through the night. Thunderheart's gash was deep, requiring stitches and antibiotics, but his vitals were strong. As dawn broke, the rain eased, and Lila watched the buffalo stir in the temporary enclosure, a fenced paddock behind the clinic. His coat was cleaner now, his wounds bandaged, and his breathing steadier. When he saw her, he let out a soft huff, his head tilting as if in recognition. Lila's heart swelled. She touched the fence, her fingers curling around the cold metal. You're gonna make it, Thunderheart, she whispered. But the mystery lingered. Lila returned to the clinic, where Martinez had finished stabilizing the tiger. The collar tag sat on a table, its rusted surface a clue to a darker story. Lila called a contact at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who confirmed her suspicions. Crescent Exotic Imports was a known front for illegal animal trafficking, operating out of a defunct warehouse in Billings. The tiger, likely smuggled from Asia, had probably escaped a transport gone wrong. But how it had ended up in the draw, and why Thunderheart had protected it, remained unanswered. Word of the incident spread quickly. By midday, a local news crew arrived, their cameras trained on the clinic as they interviewed Lila and Martinez. This buffalo's behavior is unprecedented, Lila told the reporter, her voice steady but passionate. He risked his life to protect a tiger, a predator. That's not just instinct. That's intelligence, maybe even compassion. The reporter's eyes widened. You're saying this buffalo showed empathy? I'm saying we don't know the full story yet, Lila replied. But Thunderheart's actions could change how we see buffalo, maybe all animals. Behind the scenes, Lila and Spotted Elk investigated the tiger's origins. Tire tracks near the draw led to a dirt road, where they found a discarded crate with air holes and traces of blood. The evidence pointed to a panicked smuggler abandoning the tiger after it escaped, likely attacked by wolves before Thunderheart intervened. Lila's grandfather, a Blackfeet elder, visited the clinic that afternoon, his weathered face solemn as he studied the buffalo. "Tatanka is a teacher," he said, his voice low. "This one chose to protect life, even a stranger's. That's a lesson for us all." As the day ended, Lila stood by Thunderheart's enclosure, the setting sun casting a golden glow over his recovering form. His coat was regaining its luster, his massive head raised as he grazed on fresh hay. He looked at her, his eyes soft, and let out a low bellow, a sound that seemed to carry gratitude. Lila's heart ached with a mix of hope and determination. Thunderheart's story was bigger than this moment. It could inspire change, maybe even spark a movement to protect the buffalo and crack down on trafficking. But new challenges loomed. The tiger needed a permanent home, and Thunderheart's herd was still out there, vulnerable in the storm's aftermath. Lila knew the next steps would be harder, convincing authorities to act, finding a sanctuary for the tiger, and ensuring Thunderheart's legacy lived on. As she watched him, a plan began to form, one that could honor his courage and change the prairie forever. The Montana sun hung low over the Blackfeet reservation, painting the prairie in hues of gold and amber. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the grass glistening with dew. Dr. Lila Blackfoot stood outside the veterinary clinic, her boots planted in the damp earth, her eyes fixed on the temporary enclosure where Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, grazed with newfound strength. His chestnut-brown coat, once matted with blood and mud, now shimmered in the light, his bandaged shoulder a testament to his survival. The gash was healing, and his deep, steady bellows echoed across the paddock, a sound that stirred Lila's heart. Nearby, in a separate enclosure, the young tiger, now named Ember for the spark in his amber eyes, rested under sedation, his stitched wounds a roadmap of his own resilience. Lila's hands gripped the fence, her mind a whirlwind of the past week's events. Thunderheart's extraordinary act, shielding a wounded tiger from a wolf pack, had not only saved Ember's life but had ignited a firestorm of attention. News outlets across Montana and beyond had picked up the story, dubbing Thunderheart the guardian buffalo. Social media buzzed with photos of his towering form, his curved horns glinting, and speculation about his intelligence. Researchers from the University of Montana had arrived, eager to study his behavior, while conservation groups called for greater protection for the reservation's buffalo herds. But for Lila, it was personal. Thunderheart had trusted her, and that bond had changed her. "Lila, you ready?" Tommy Two Rivers called, striding across the lot with a clipboard. His weathered hat was tilted back, his face lit with a rare grin. "The council's meeting in an hour. They want your input on the sanctuary plan." She nodded, her braid swinging. "Yeah, I'm ready. We can't let this moment slip away." The sanctuary plan was Lila's vision, a permanent preserve on the reservation for Thunderheart and his herd, a place where buffalo could roam free and safe, their cultural and ecological significance honored. The story of Thunderheart's compassion had struck a chord, not just locally but nationally, and Lila saw a chance to leverage it. The Blackfeet Tribal Council was open to the idea, but funding and logistics were hurdles. The tiger, Ember, needed a home too, a reputable sanctuary far from the hands of traffickers like Crescent Exotic Imports, whose abandoned crate had been traced to a smuggling ring busted in Billings. Inside the clinic, Dr. Elena Martinez was preparing Ember for transport. The tiger's condition had improved dramatically, his ribs were less stark, his coat regaining its fiery sheen. Lila visited him daily, and each time, his amber eyes met hers with a quiet strength that mirrored Thunderheart's. "You're a survivor, just like your guardian," she murmured, watching him through the enclosure's bars. Ember's tail flicked, a soft growl rumbling in his throat, as if acknowledging her presence. The council meeting was held in a community center, its walls adorned with Blackfeet artwork depicting buffalo and the sacred landscape. Lila stood before the elders, her voice steady as she outlined her plan. "Thunderheart's actions show us something profound," she said, her hands gesturing with the passion of her grandfather's storytelling. He protected a creature that didn't belong here, risked his life for it. That's not just instinct, that's a kind of wisdom we need to learn from. A sanctuary can protect his herd and teach the world about buffalo intelligence and our responsibility to this land. Elder Joseph Running Wolf, his face lined with years of wisdom, nodded slowly. Tatanka has always been our teacher, he said. This bull, this Thunderheart, speaks to our hearts. But the cost of a sanctuary is high, and the government moves slowly. I know, Lila replied. But the world is watching. We've got researchers offering grants, conservation groups pledging support. Thunderheart's story can fund this, if we act now. The council agreed to move forward, tasking Lila with coordinating with external partners. That evening, she met with Dr. Sarah Klein, a zoologist from the University of Montana, who was studying Thunderheart's behavior. His actions suggest a level of emotional intelligence we've underestimated in buffalo, Klein said, her tablet filled with notes. Protecting a predator? That's altruistic behavior, rare in the wild. We're proposing a study on buffalo cognition, with Thunderheart as the centerpiece. Lila's heart swelled. He's more than a subject, she said. He's a symbol. But a study could bring funding, maybe even policy changes. The next day, Lila and Tommy oversaw Thunderheart's release from the clinic's paddock to a temporary grazing area on the reservation, a step toward reuniting him with his herd. As the gate opened, Thunderheart stepped forward, his massive hooves thudding against the earth. He paused, his head turning to Lila, and let out a low bellow, a sound that seemed to carry gratitude. She approached, her hand outstretched, and he nudged her palm, his warm breath grazing her skin. The moment was quiet but profound, a bond forged in crisis now sealed in trust. "Missed you, big guy," she whispered, her eyes stinging. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Thunderheart's silhouette against the prairie, his massive shoulders and curved horns a vision of resilience. Nearby, tribal members gathered, some snapping photos, others murmuring prayers to Tatanka. The air hummed with possibility, a new era for the buffalo, sparked by one bull's courage. Ember's transfer was arranged to a sanctuary in Colorado, one with expertise in big cats and a commitment to rehabilitation. Lila visited him one last time, her fingers brushing the bars of his transport crate. "You've got a new home, Ember," she said. "Thanks to Thunderheart, you've got a second chance." The tiger's eyes met hers, a soft chuff escaping his throat, and Lila felt a pang of loss but also hope. His story, like Thunderheart's, would ripple outward. The broader impact was already unfolding. The Fish and Wildlife Service, spurred by the trafficking evidence, launched a wider investigation into crescent exotic imports, uncovering a network spanning 3 states. Conservation groups used Thunderheart's story to lobby for stricter wildlife protection laws, while the Blackfeet Nation saw an influx of donations for the sanctuary. Lila worked tirelessly, meeting with funders, drafting proposals, and speaking to reporters. Her once quiet life as a biologist had transformed. She was now a voice for the buffalo, driven by Thunderheart's example. As weeks passed, the sanctuary took shape. A 5,000-acre parcel was secured, with plans for fencing, water systems, and educational programs. Thunderheart, now fully recovered, was reunited with his herd, a moment Lila witnessed with tears in her eyes. He galloped across the prairie, his bellows echoing, his coat gleaming under the wide sky. The herd welcomed him, their heads bobbing in recognition, and Lila felt a weight lift. She'd lost her way after years of bureaucratic battles and personal struggles, her divorce, her distance from her culture, but Thunderheart had reminded her of her purpose. Standing on a rise, watching Thunderheart lead his herd, Lila felt a shift within her. She was no longer just a scientist, she was a steward, a storyteller, a bridge between her people's past and a future where buffalo could thrive. The prairie stretched before her, vast and alive, and she knew Thunderheart's legacy would endure, not just in the sanctuary, but in the hearts of those who heard his story. Yet challenges remained. Funding was still short, and skeptics questioned whether a single buffalo's actions could justify such a project. Lila knew the fight wasn't over, but as she watched Thunderheart's silhouette against the sunset, she felt ready. His courage had transformed her, and together, they would transform the world. The Montana prairie stretched endless under a late summer sky, the horizon a tapestry of gold and crimson as the sun dipped low. Dr. Lila Blackfoot stood on a gentle rise, her boots sinking into the soft earth, the scent of sagebrush and sweetgrass filling the air. Below her, in the heart of the newly established Tatanka sanctuary, Thunderheart grazed among his herd. The massive buffalo bull, now fully healed, was a vision of power, his chestnut-brown coat gleaming, his curved horns catching the last light, his deep bellows resonating across the 5,000-acre preserve. The herd moved with him, their hooves a soft thunder against the grass, a living testament to the resilience of the American West. Lila's heart swelled as she watched. It had been a year since that stormy night when she'd found Thunderheart standing guard over Ember, the wounded tiger, defying instinct to protect a creature that didn't belong. That act of compassion had changed everything. The sanctuary, funded by a surge of donations and grants sparked by Thunderheart's story, was now a reality, a safe haven for buffalo, a place where the Blackfeet Nation's cultural heritage and the prairie's ecological balance could thrive. A wooden sign at the entrance bore Thunderheart's name, carved alongside a Blackfeet prayer for Tatanka, the buffalo, a symbol of strength and sacrifice. Thunderheart's legacy rippled far beyond the reservation. His story had captivated the world, from viral videos to scientific journals. Researchers at the University of Montana had published a groundbreaking study on buffalo cognition, citing Thunderheart's altruistic behavior as evidence of emotional intelligence in bison. Conservation groups leveraged the findings to push for stronger protections for wild herds, while the Fish and Wildlife Service's investigation into crescent exotic imports dismantled a trafficking ring that had smuggled hundreds of exotic animals. Ember, now thriving in a Colorado sanctuary, had become an ambassador for big cat conservation, his own story intertwined with Thunderheart's. Lila, too, had been transformed. Once a biologist buried in data and bureaucracy, she'd found her voice as a storyteller and advocate. The sanctuary's education center, where she now led programs, taught visitors, school children, tourists, scientists, about the buffalo's role as a keystone species and its sacred place in Blackfeet culture. Her grandfather, Elder Joseph Running Wolf, had stood beside her at the center's opening, his eyes shining as he blessed the land. Tatanka has spoken through Thunderheart, he'd said. You've listened, and now the world listens too. As she watched Thunderheart now, Lila's thoughts drifted to the lessons he'd taught her. She'd been adrift after her divorce, questioning her path, her connection to her heritage. But Thunderheart's trust, his nudge against her hand, his unwavering resolve, had rekindled her purpose. She'd learned that compassion could bridge divides, that a single act of courage could spark change. Standing here, her braids swaying in the breeze, she felt whole, rooted to the land and her people in a way she hadn't since childhood. A soft bellow drew her attention. Thunderheart lifted his massive head, his dark eyes meeting hers across the distance. He stepped forward, his hooves steady, and paused, as if acknowledging her presence. Lila smiled, her hand resting on the beaded necklace her grandfather had given her, a buffalo charm at its center. She walked down the rise, her boots crunching on the grass, and stopped at the fence. Thunderheart approached, his warm breath grazing her outstretched hand, a quiet moment of connection that felt like a promise kept. Behind her, a group of visitors gathered, their cameras clicking softly. A young girl, no older than 10, tugged at her mother's sleeve. Is that really him? The buffalo who saved the tiger? Lila turned, nodding, her voice warm. That's Thunderheart. He showed us what it means to protect someone, even when it's hard. The girl's eyes widened, and Lila saw a spark of wonder, the same wonder she'd felt that night in the draw. It was a reminder of why she fought. For Thunderheart, for the prairie, for the next generation to know the power of connection. As the sun sank, casting Thunderheart's silhouette against the fiery sky, Lila reflected on the broader impact. The sanctuary had inspired a national conversation about wildlife conservation, with calls for new policies to protect keystone species and combat trafficking. Schools across Montana now taught Thunderheart's story, weaving it into lessons about empathy and stewardship. Lila had spoken at conferences, her words carrying the weight of her experience. Thunderheart taught us that compassion isn't bound by species. It's a force that can change the world, if we let it. She turned to the visitors, her voice steady but urgent. You've seen Thunderheart, heard his story. But it's not just his story, it's ours. Every one of us can make a difference. Support sanctuaries like this one. Speak up for the wild places and creatures that can't speak for themselves. Ask yourself, have you ever witnessed an animal's strength, its intelligence, change how you see the world? If you have, share that story. If you haven't, go find it. The crowd nodded, some wiping tears, others murmuring agreement. Lila's gaze returned to Thunderheart, his massive form a beacon of hope. The prairie stretched beyond him, vast and alive, its heartbeat echoing in his bellows. She knew challenges remained, funding battles, land disputes, the ongoing fight to protect wild herds. But Thunderheart's legacy was a fire that wouldn't die, a call to action that resonated in her soul and beyond. As the stars emerged, Lila touched the fence, her fingers lingering where Thunderheart's breath had warmed her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to him, but to the land, the sky, the spirit of Tatanka. She turned to the visitors, her eyes bright. "Let's carry this forward," she said. "For Thunderheart, for the buffalo, for all of us." And in that moment, as Thunderheart's bellow echoed across the prairie, Lila knew his story would live on, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of unexpected bonds, and the call to protect the wild heart of the world.